Hello everybody, and happy 2022. This is my first video of 2022, and my first video in like 2 months. Yeah. Sorry about that, but school kinda took up all my time. I'll try to do better this year. I'll try to post every single week, doing some kind of ranking or review or trailer reaction or something, each week. So, yeah, sorry about the kind of break in content on my channel. But we're finally back on this set because I am home in between semesters. But in a few weeks, the background will be my dorm room set. So it won't be as interesting as that. But anyway, though, yeah. So today, the actual point of the video, I am doing a tier list of the MCU movies. It's going to be a 3-part video. This is the first part where I was going to break it up in phases, like phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, and it would be 4 parts, but I realized that the first 2 phases of the MCU are kind of short, so I figured that I'll make this video the first 2 phases, and then the next part will be phase 3, and then phase 4, or the 2021 phase, as I like to call it. It's kind of crazy that all of the phase 4 content we have now, like, we have quite a bit of it, and it all came out in 2021. Like, that's kind of crazy, but, yeah, so this part, first part, is phases 1 and 2, so, yeah, without further ado, let's get into the tier ranking. Oh, also, new year, new intro. Not really by choice, my hard drive kind of died, so I currently do not have access to my old intro, so, yeah. I'm not actually sure what I'm doing with the intro, and might be similar to my old intro. I haven't actually made it yet, so, yeah, it might be completely different, and may be extremely similar, but it's a new intro, so, yeah. New year, new intro. Apparently. Anyway, though, let's get into the tier list. So, we're gonna go in order of release, and so we're gonna start with the very first MCU movie ever, Iron Man, and I'm gonna put it in A tier. I feel like at one point I would have put it in S tier, but I don't know. I think it's a good film. I don't think it's quite S tier anymore. I kind of don't really enjoy it as much as I used to. But it's still a great film introducing us to the world of the MCU, the character of Iron Man. It's always fun seeing Tony Stark, Robert Downey Jr. doing things as Tony Stark. It's just fun, and this movie kind of is what started, started everything, and got us invested in the character, gotten us to fall in love with the character of Tony Stark. It's good. It's a good film in that sense. It's just, since it is the first film in the MCU, it is very much smaller scale than what you get later on, and, I think Obadiah Stane, he's a pretty good villain, but I definitely don't think he's one of the best villains in the MCU, so he kind of disappoints me every time I watch it. I'm kind of like, okay, he's a pretty good villain, but I always kind of think he's better than he actually is, to be honest. And yeah, we all know it's a good movie, but I definitely feel that I feel like my enjoyment of it has actually gone down since in the past few years. Like, I feel like it was once a lot higher than it is at the moment. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with this movie now. I think it's an A-tier film. It's a really good MCU movie that I enjoy quite a bit, but it's not quite the best of the best where I would have actually put it at one point. Anyway, though, let's move on to the Incredible Hulk in D tier. Yeah. It's not a bad movie. It is not a terrible movie, but it's just a forgettable one. It's just one that doesn't really fit with the rest of the MCU. I kind of always have to remind myself that it's part of it because it's just so far removed from everything else. The actor changes. There's really no references to this movie in the future. I mean, sure, you kind of get a bit of a reference in the Avengers when Bruce Banner says, "Oh, last time I was in New York, I kind of broke Harlem." That's kind of a reference to the final battle of this movie. We of course get Thunderbolt Ross in Captain America: Civil War and Black Widow and Infinity War, kind of surrounding the whole Sokovia Accords plotline. And we get Abomination in Shang-Chi, looking very, very different from what he looked like in this movie. So there's really aren't that many connections from this movie to the rest of the MCU. Yeah, you get Tony Stark at the end of it talking to Thunderbolt Ross, like, "Oh, we're gonna recruit Hulk," or something like that. Yeah, it's just doesn't really fit with the rest of it. I did an MCU rewatch before doing this, and this is the one I skipped, mostly because it's not on Disney Plus and I don't have it on DVD or anything. So, I don't really. I would have to pay to rent or buy it to actually watch it. So it's not really as easily accessible as the rest of them, which is kind of the main reason I didn't watch it. But it's also the one that you kind of can do that the most with. You can really be like, yeah, I'm gonna skip this one if you're doing an MCU rewatch. You're like, yeah, this is it's there. It's a movie. If it's on TV, if I have chance, if it ever gets on Disney Plus or something, I'll watch it. But it's it's easily skippable. It's easily forgettable. And it just really just does not fit as well with the rest of the MCU, which is why it comes in at D tier. But now we'll move on to Iron Man 2, which I'll actually put in B tier. I feel like a lot of people will put this lower on the list, but I actually quite enjoy this film. I think part of the reason is because, of course, it's an Iron Man movie, and I really enjoy the character of Tony Stark, of Iron Man. It's fun seeing Robert Downey Jr. doing his thing again as Iron Man. I think that's kind of what elevates this movie, whereas otherwise it would be a lot lower on the list because when you really look at the movie in and of itself, it isn't that great of a movie. It's really a mess trying to do all these different plot lines and all these different things. You kind of have this thing where Tony's dying, and then you have this whole thing with Justin Hammer, and you have this whole thing with Whiplash, and you have this whole thing with trying to set up the Avengers and introducing Black Widow, and you just have a bunch of things going on in this movie that don't really all mesh together that well, and it just ends up being this movie that you're just like, you were trying to do too many things, and it didn't work that well. And the only thing that really saves this movie is the fact that, again, we get to see Robert Downey Jr. doing his thing as Iron Man, as Tony Stark again. That's always a lot of fun to watch. So, while this movie definitely has a lot of faults to it, it also has a lot of good stuff. Other stuff that's good about this movie, we get introduced to War Machine. Rhodey becomes War Machine. That's very cool. We get Black Widow is introduced. And while that is a plot line that probably didn't need to be in this movie, it's cool that it is, and it's cool that scene where she beats up all the bad guys in the hallway. That is an epic scene, and it's kind of the scene that made us all we want to see a Black Widow movie. And then for some reason we didn't get one for 10 years, then it ended up not... And it ended up getting delayed, and then it ended up not being as good as we all thought it would have been. Why is this not focusing on my face? Okay. So even though, again, a lot of people would probably put this lower because it does have a lot of faults and tries to do a lot of things that it's just kind of a mess of a movie, it does have a lot of things that when I rewatch it, I realize I actually quite enjoy this movie a lot. So, yeah, it comes in at B tier. Moving on to Thor, which is probably another opinion that I have this one that isn't going to be that great, but I'm putting it at C tier. It's a movie I always think I like more, but I just put Thor Dark World there. Sorry, I picked up the wrong one. Thor. It's focusing. Why is it focusing on the minion? I don't want it to focus on the minion. Focus on my face. I'm the one talking. So yeah, Thor. Yeah, it's definitely a movie I think I enjoy more than I actually do. When I rewatched it for this, I realized I really don't enjoy this movie that much. It's kind of just a bland movie. There's not much to it that I'm like, oh, I really enjoy it. Like, yeah, there's stuff with Thor and Jane that they start their relationship, and yeah, that's nice to see. And it introduces us to Asgard and that whole world, which I have to admit, like, they did a good job with setting up that world. I think it really looks amazing. But just the actual plot line in this isn't really that great. And really, if you're looking for a villain in this movie, none of the people in this movie who are villains actually are that interesting. Like, Loki's great, but Loki isn't that great in this movie yet. Like, I was watching it and I'm like, you know what? This is kind of Loki before he was Loki. Like, I don't really like Loki as much in this movie, whereas later on he becomes a character that I really, really love. Loki's great, but in this movie, he's just not that great of a character yet. Then you can look at Laufey, the ice giant. I totally did not know his name until, like, a few years ago. Like, all I knew was he's the ice giant. Like, he's the leader of the ice giants. I didn't really care what his name was, and I actually think he's a less interesting villain than Malekith in Thor the Dark World. And that's one that is kind of the joke. Like, oh, he's the go-to villain. Malekith is the go-to villain for, like, pointing out that the MCU doesn't develop their villains well. But Laufey, I feel like, is even worse. Like, I'm not invested at all with Laufey's character and why he's a villain. He's just there. Yeah, sure, you'd say you didn't have to develop him that much because Loki's the actual villain, but, like, Loki isn't that great of a villain yet in this movie, so, yeah, I just don't enjoy this movie as much as I thought I once did, and even though pretty much everybody says that, everybody thinks this movie is better than Thor the Dark World, I actually enjoy Thor the Dark World a little bit better. I'll get to that later, and yeah, this movie just doesn't really do it for me. But now we'll move on to Captain America, the First Avenger, which I will put in B tier. It's a good enough origin story for Captain America. I, of course, love the character of Captain America, of Steve Rogers, and they do a good job introducing us to him in this movie. But it's not as interesting as the next two Captain America movies, as Winter Soldier and Civil War. It's a World War II film that's also a origin story for Captain America. Good enough as it is. It's not one that I'm like, oh, this is one of the best MCU films in the world, or this is the best Captain America movie. It's like, it's a Captain America movie. It's a good origin story. It's good enough for what it is. Sets up the Steve Rogers and Peggy Carter relationship well. Yeah. It's good enough film. And I enjoy it a lot, but it's definitely not the one that I'm always talking about, so, yeah. But, moving on to the Avengers. first one could... It's going in S tier, is what I'm trying to say. Definitely still amazing. It's the first time that they ever tried this team-up thing, crossing over all these heroes, and it's something that a lot of people were like, it's not going to work. How could you have all these heroes in the same movie and, give them all the time they need, balance everything right to where, it doesn't feel, like some heroes got more screen time than others. And they did it amazingly well. And even though it's not a novelty anymore, like, obviously this has been something that has been done a lot more, with other franchises, with other movies inside of this universe, and it's been done bigger and better, but this still is, like, a great film. Like, it's still, you look back at it and you're just like, wow, like, they just did this amazingly, balancing all these heroes together. Of course, Loki, whereas I didn't really think he was that great in Thor. This is where he really becomes the Loki we know and love. He is a great villain in this movie, and yeah, I think everything about this movie works amazingly. Of course, the final battle is still so iconic, so awesome to watch. All of them, all of the Avengers together fighting these aliens in New York. It is awesome, it is cool, and even though, again, it's not as much of a novelty anymore, and it's just so cool that, like, it's more than just that novelty, because I feel like back in 2012 when it came out, you kind of were like, is it just the novelty of seeing all these heroes that makes it cool? It is definitely not. It is definitely not just the novelty of it, because it's not a novelty anymore, and it's still epic to see them all together fighting the aliens. I think it's, in some ways, better than some of the team-ups later in MCU. Like, it's awesome. Yeah, of course, Captain America's suit in this one is a little bit too goofy, a little bit too comic booky. It's like, that's definitely something that I think was a good change they made later on, of making it more practical and not like, so campy. Keeping the red, white, and blue colors of the costume, but making it, look less ridiculous than it does here. But that's kind of my only thing that draws this movie back, in the slightest bit. Like, it is just awesome to see all of them together, and yeah, S tier, easily S tier. It's amazing. But now we'll move on to Iron Man 3, which I will put in B tier. It's definitely gets way too much hate. I will say that. It is definitely a movie that gets way, way too much hate. I feel like a lot of people will put it actually lower than I put it. But yeah, it is a great film. It is still an awesome film in the MCU. It is still awesome to see, again, Tony Stark, Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark, doing his thing. It's always cool to see that, and we get that very much in this movie. Yeah, sure, the Mandarin thing is a little bit like, I'm with y'all on that one of like, yeah, they kind of messed up a little bit on that one. They kind of redeemed themselves a bit with Shang-Chi of showing, like, the actual Mandarin, although, would have been cool to see him actually go up against Iron Man at one point, but whatever. I don't think I hate it as much as some people do, because I'm not really, like, a comics fan, so, like, I don't really know the character of the Mandarin that well, so it wasn't like, oh man, you ruined this character that I love for the comics. It's like, I don't really know the character, so, it wasn't really that I don't really have that big of an issue as much as a lot of people do with it, the whole Mandarin thing, but it is still something that I'm like, you just made him an actor, like, yeah. So that was a bit disappointing, but still a great film that I think gets way too much hate, and is oddly kind of forgotten in a lot of the MC movies moving forward. Like, he seems to retire at the end, but then he's back in Age of Ultron, like nothing happened, and it's like, I thought you were retiring being Iron Man or something like that, but nope. He's just like, nope, he's there. They kind of represent in Civil War where they're like, he's talking about how he was going to retire, but he couldn't, and they had to do the whole thing with taking down Hydra, and that led to Pepper and him breaking up. But it's like, it's more of a retroactive thing of trying to be like, oh yeah, we forgot that happened, so we're going to write in this line, and less of like, no, this was the plan all along. So it's kind of weird that this movie seems to be forgotten in some MCU films, but I think that it is still a great movie that gets way too much hate. But we'll move on to Thor: The Dark World, and I'm actually going to put it in B tier. Yeah, I actually enjoy this movie a lot more than Thor, the first Thor movie, and it's another one that I think gets way too much hate. I think it's a really good Thor movie. Obviously, Ragnarok is the best of them all, but like, this is still a good Thor movie. I think, sure, Malekith, not a great villain, not great motivation, not interesting, but I think they make up for it with, the Thor and Jane relationship, the Thor and Loki, banter, and just the interactions between the good guys, I think makes up for the kind of lacking in motivation from the villain. Because it is, I think this is one of the movies that really does the Loki thing well. It's the movie that I think kind of displays the Loki character the best, because it shows him as this, sort of villain, sort of hero. Okay, actually, I think Ragnarok does it the best, now I think about it. But, like, this is a film, it's one of the films that does it great, because, it shows him as this sort of hero, sort of villain, kind of whatever fits his best self-interest. It kind of displays that in this movie. And so I think because of that, it's very enjoyable on the Loki front, and also the Thor and Jane stuff. I really enjoy their relationship, what they do with their relationship in this movie, and I think that the whole stuff with the convergence, I think is very interesting. And yeah. I think also with Loki, it does the fake death the best out of all of his fake deaths, where you kind of think that they actually killed him, and then of course he comes back, and he ends up actually being Odin at the end of it, and, it sets up Ragnarok stuff. And so I think that this is actually a pretty good Thor movie. I think that it gets way too much hate. Like, people have put this at the bottom of their MCU rankings. I really do not think it is that bad of a movie. I thoroughly enjoy this every time I watch it. A lot more than the first Thor movie. So yeah. I think this is a good Thor movie. Of course, Ragnarok is better. We'll get to that in the next video. But it's good. What can I say? It's good. So now, we'll move on to Captain America, The Winter Soldier, which, of course, I'm putting in S tier because it's amazing. Yeah. This is a really good MCU movie. I don't think anybody has ever said that this movie isn't great. Sure, maybe people Some people wouldn't put it in S tier, maybe it would go in A tier. But I don't think anybody's like, this movie sucks. Like, pretty much the general consensus among MCU fans is this is a very, very good MCU movie, if not one of the best. I think the whole storyline of Hydra infiltrating S.H.I.E.L.D. and you're not knowing, who to trust, that's a very interesting plot line that could be used for Skrulls later on in the MCU, even though they kind of make them actually good in Captain Marvel. I'll talk about that in the next video when I get to Captain Marvel. But I think that's something that if they, make Skrulls evil down the line and you have a secret invasion type thing going on where you don't know who to trust, who's a Skrull, who's not, that could be interesting. And this movie, while it doesn't deal with Skrulls, it does deal with Hydra infiltrating S.H.I.E.L.D. And I really enjoy everything that comes with that. Of course, the elevator scene, oh my god. Okay, that is a great scene where Captain America is beating up a bunch of guys in an elevator. It is awesome. And again, I don't think anyone's ever said that the elevator scene isn't amazing. The general consensus is it is an epic scene, and it's even referenced in Endgame. Yeah, it is that's a great scene, and the whole movie is just great. Again, with the whole, who do you trust, who can you not trust. Of course, introduces Falcon to the mix, who becomes Captain America later on, which is cool. And of course, get the return of Bucky and the whole, he was actually the Winter Soldier, but he was mind-controlled, setting up, pretty much what his main character arc has been in the MCU so far, is trying to deal with his past as the Winter Soldier, and it starts here with introducing the character of the Winter Soldier and revealing that it's Bucky, and Captain America kind of showing, like, his relationship with Bucky and kind of setting up where his mind is going into Civil War and why he makes the choices that he does to try to protect Bucky. And, that final battle in the helicarrier where, at first he's fighting Bucky, but then he's like, no, I'm not going to fight you. Sure, I'm your mission, so finish it. I'm with you to the end of the line. It is such a powerful scene where he's like, you're my friend. Whatever. Like, you just see how much he cares about Bucky, and again, that sets up where his, how he sees him, so you kind of understand, and it kind of, like, sets up their relationship, so, like, it makes sense why he makes the choices he does in Civil War. So yeah, it's a great movie. It is a great MCU movie, a great Captain America movie, a great movie in general, so yeah, it goes in S tier. But we'll move on to Guardians of the Galaxy, which I will put in A tier. It's hilarious. It is a ton of fun introducing us to these characters that 10 years ago, if you would ask me to name any of these characters, I would be like, who the heck are these people? Who the heck is Groot? Like, this walking tree that only says, I am Groot? Like, what? A raccoon? What is happening here? But they somehow made them household names, getting people to go around saying, I am Groot. It is just hilarious that they were able to do this, that they were able to pull this off, to get these really, really obscure comic book characters to become household names where people love these movies, these characters, and they're getting a holiday special next year. Like, I don't know. It is just amazing that they were able to turn these characters into household names. and that this movie, while it's extremely hilarious and stupid at times, uh, it actually has a lot of heart to it. I mean, it's really the story of this family coming together, you know, and I don't know, it's just cool that while it is extremely hilarious at times, it's also could be very heartfelt at other times. So I think, uh, yeah, I think it really just does a good job at balancing the humor and the heart and introducing us to these characters that I don't think anybody would have thought would become like household names, but they have. I think just this is something that uh, that just kind of magic in a bottle. Like it's, I don't know. They just really made something great here, and they become characters that I really enjoy, and I can't wait for the holiday special. Like I would never thought that I'd be excited to see a holiday special where there's a team of characters that consist of a talking tree and a raccoon. Like I never would have thought that would be a thing that would get me excited, but it does. It's like I can't wait to see this. I can't wait to see this holiday special next year. Like it's or this year. This year. um, yeah. So it is a great movie. They just did something very special here. So yeah, it comes in at A tier. But now we'll move on to Avengers Age of Ultron, which I'll put in A tier. And it's definitely a movie that I think gets a lot of hate. Um, and it's definitely, I'll admit, it is, I do think it's the worst of the Avengers movies, but I think people have given it a lot more hate than it actually deserves, because I think it still is a really good Avengers movie, and I think Ultron, James Spader's Ultron, I think it's really cool, and I kind of want them to bring him back later on, somehow reveal that Ultron actually survived, or maybe do like a multiverse thing, I mean, and what if they had Ultron in it? So hopefully they can like do something where they could have like a multiverse version of Ultron come back to kind of return in a future MCU project. But I think he was really great here. I think they continue to do the team of the Avengers, the dynamic well, and again, while it may not be the best of the Avengers films, I think it is still a really good one, and I really like how, I mean, this is kind of the only one where the Avengers are really an established thing from start to finish, because the others, the first Avengers movie is them becoming the team, and then Infinity War is, they've broken up because of Civil War, and they're kind of two different teams fighting Thanos. Uh, and then Endgame is them coming back together to fix the mistake, bring everybody back, fix the failure that they had in Infinity War. And so this is really the only one where you get the Avengers fully formed, fully together from start to finish. And I think in some ways it does kind of make it sad that this isn't as good as it could have been, because it is the only one where the Avengers are fully together. But I think that it's something that kind of makes it better in my mind, because the Avengers are fully together. So it makes it the one where they're all together, and it makes it so, it is special in its own way, even though it may not have the best plot line of the others, and it may not balance all of the stuff it's trying to do as well. It is still, again, the one where they're all together, and I think there's something to be said for that. So I definitely enjoy this one a lot more, and also it introduces Wanda and Pietro. It's definitely Pietro's death carries a lot more weight now than it did when it first came out, because now we get to know Wanda, and we kind of care about it more because we care more about Wanda. Whereas when it first came out, we were like, I don't really care that much about Wanda Maximoff, and I care even less about Pietro. The only reason I care is because he's Quicksilver, and it was cool to have a speedster for a second, but don't really care that much about him. So watching it back in 2015, you're like, I don't really care about this at all. Well, watching it now, you're like, okay, I actually care a little bit about it. Of course, after watching WandaVision, you care about it a little bit more. So, yeah, it's definitely a movie that gets way, way too much hate, and I actually enjoy quite a bit, even though it may be only A tier, whereas, spoiler alert, the rest of the Avengers films are going to be S tier. But finishing off this video with the final film of Phase 2, for some reason it isn't Age of Ultron, it is Ant-Man, which I will put in A or B tier. I'm gonna put it in B tier. It is a pretty good MCU movie. It is a heist movie. It introduces us to the character of Ant-Man well, and of course his friends Luis, and his other two heist buddies. They're of course hilarious to watch, and of course you enjoy the characters of Hank and Hope. So it definitely, I'm gonna put it in A tier. I changed my mind. I'm putting it in A tier. I think that it's quite good. It's funny. It is a good origin story for Ant-Man, and it isn't just, kind of normal guy becomes a superhero by getting powers or making a suit for himself. It's more of him taking on the mantle of Ant-Man from Hank Pym. And then, of course, this movie introduces us to the quantum realm, which, of course, is the main thing used in Endgame to, get the Infinity Stones from the past to bring everybody back. It's the thing used to do that makes the time travel possible. So it's cool that, this thing that's introduced in this very small-scaled movie, get it? Small scale, because of Ant-Man. That this thing that's kind of introduced in this standalone origin story of this character that's kind of an obscure character, becomes this thing that is used to save the universe and Endgame. And of course, I guess it's going to be explored a lot more in the next Ant-Man movie, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, and of course was also explored a lot in Ant-Man and the Wasp. So yeah, I think that it is a very good movie in the MCU. It's funny, does the whole heist thing well, and it introduces us to the character of Ant-Man, Paul Rudd as Scott Lang, which he's hilarious. He's great. And, of course, introduces us to the quantum realm, which is becoming very much a thing that is important in the MCU. So it comes in A tier, and that finishes off the second phase, which means that this video is over. I have placed all of the Phase 1 and Phase 2 MCU movies into their tiers, and I'll come back in the next video to place the third phase of the MCU. Anyway, though, please comment below your thoughts on my tier list and maybe like a ranking of your Phase 1 and 2 MCU movies. And also, remember to give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and maybe check out some of my other videos. And with that said, Happy New Year, and that's a wrap.